You know, every single day of our lives is governed by rules. But have you ever stopped to think about who actually gets to make them? Where we're going to unpack 13 different forms of government to understand exactly who holds the reins in our societies. Today, we're looking at this completely impartially, based entirely on structural facts. We're going to strip away all the politics to look at the pure mechanics of how human societies organize themselves.
All right, part one, rule by one or few. Let's dive straight into systems defined by highly concentrated power.
Starting with rule by one, we have monarchy. This is all about the family line. It can be purely symbolic, like the royals you see in the UK, Japan, Sweden, or Spain, or it can be absolute, like in Saudi Arabia, where the monarch actually calls the shots. Now contrast that with an autocracy. Dating all the way back to ancient absolute monarchs, an autocracy grants unchecked supreme power to just a single ruler or a ruling party. In this system, decisions are absolute, and the autocrat has total control over the civil liberties of the people. What's truly fascinating here is that trade-off. See, monarchies run the incredible risk of putting completely unsuitable, unvetted heirs in charge simply because of their bloodline. I mean, you never really know what kind of ruler a toddler is going to grow up to be. Autocracies, meanwhile, carry the severe risk of the leader becoming a dictator who severely abuses that absolute power. A prime historical example of this is the Soviet Union during the rule of Joseph Stalin. Expanding that power circle just a little bit, we hit oligarchy. This literally translates to rule of the few. We're talking about a tiny sliver of elites who rise up through tremendous financial or military means to control the nation. The major flaw here? It creates deep social and economic inequalities. Only the rich and powerful benefit. Actually, this financial dynamic leads some to view even the USA, which is formally a federal system, as an oligarchy, simply due to the massive influence large corporations have on the decisions of politicians. Moving on to part two, power to the people. Let's see what happens when we shift the power away from the elites and hand it to the wider population. Democracy flips the script entirely. As the quote points out, democracy is as old as human civilization itself, but it really first popped up in the ancient political and philosophical teachings of Athens. In a true democracy, the citizens themselves are the supreme rulers. They determine the leaders and the laws of the land through majority vote. It's an environment where fundamental human rights are respected and people actually exercise their free will. We see highly democratic systems today in places like Norway, Sweden, and New Zealand. Now, here is a crucial point of distinction: a republic versus a democracy. The concept of a republic goes way back to the ancient teachings of Plato. In a republic, the core idea is that the people truly own the state, and they elect representatives to make decisions that should favor everyone, ensuring equal opportunity. But in a pure democracy, the people don't technically own the state, but they are the absolute sovereign decision makers. The big catch here is that a pure democracy can become highly unstable due to constant leadership changes. In the real world, though, these systems aren't perfectly neat boxes. They overlap all the time. Take the Philippines, for example. It operates as both a republic and a democracy. Canada is a democracy, but if you look at its constitution, it's actually a monarchy. And we have to mention the risks, too. A republic form of government can absolutely fail if a nation isn't culturally suited for it, especially if corruption and abuse become common among those elected leaders. All right, part three, structuring the state. Now that we know who fundamentally holds the power, let's look under the hood at the blueprints of how states structurally execute it. First up is a federal system, which decentralizes power for the sake of efficiency. Think of it kind of like a sports team. The central government is the head coach, delegating specific plays to the assistant coaches, which would be the individual states, allowing them to govern their own internal affairs. The United States is the classic example of this. However, it brings a massive drawback: potential economic inequality, simply because different regions have access to wildly different resources. When we compare how the executive branch operates, we're looking at presidential versus parliamentary systems. In a presidential system, like you see in South Korea, Nigeria, or Indonesia, the branches are strictly separated. One branch executes the laws, the other writes them. But in a parliamentary system, they are entirely intertwined. In countries like Japan, the executive, usually a prime minister, is pulled directly from the party with the most representation in the legislature. Binding these structural blueprints together is often a constitutional government. This is where a foundational document acts as the absolute bedrock of the country's laws, explicitly defining the limits and functions of government power. We see this in the UK's constitutional monarchy and the US's constitutional democracy. It's designed to protect your rights by limiting the government. The glaring weakness, though? Adaptability. Passing vital new laws that conflict with this foundation requires amending the Constitution itself, which is notoriously difficult to do.
Let's pause for a second and summarize these blueprints, because as you can see, every single organizational method carries a highly specific risk. Federal systems risk economic inequality. Presidential systems run the risk of too much power concentrated in one executive, leading to abuse. Parliamentary systems face instability, as the opposing party constantly challenges the ruling party, which can lead to sudden no-confidence votes. And constitutional systems, they struggle with the sheer rigidity of trying to amend vital laws.
Moving to Part 4, Economic and Total Control. It's time to shift gears and examine extreme measures. Communism is deeply rooted in the teachings of Karl Marx, who believed that a capitalist form of government would eventually just destroy itself. Because of that core belief, a communist government aims to completely eliminate private property to achieve a classless society. To pull that off, the ruling party, often led by an authoritarian figure, takes absolute control over all social, political, and economic resources. Now, it's incredibly vital to contrast communism with socialism here. Under socialism, which is practiced in countries like China and Cuba, workers actually can own property, but a central government controls and equitably distributes goods and services to eliminate social classes. Under communism, seen in Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam, there is zero private ownership. The severe risk here? A total lack of incentive. I mean, if working twice as hard doesn't yield any better personal rewards, the nation's economic engine can simply stall out. The absolute extreme of this control spectrum is totalitarianism. The term was actually coined by Benito Mussolini during his rule of fascist Italy back in the 1920s. In a totalitarian regime, the government seeks to control literally everything. It dictates not just political and economic affairs, but the deeply personal beliefs and values of its citizens. Freedom is entirely suppressed. The clearest modern example of this is North Korea, a totalitarian republic ruled by the Kim family for 3 generations. Finally, Part 5, the absence of government. We've seen absolute control, so let's flip the spectrum completely. This brings us to a really fascinating thought experiment that is actually played out in history. What actually happens to a society when you eliminate the central authority entirely? Zero state control. Enter anarchism. This is often referred to as a non-government system. The goal here isn't just to decentralize power, but to completely eliminate the government. The foundational idea is that people should be allowed to self-govern. Unlike socialism or communism, anarchism doesn't mandate equitable distribution of resources. Instead, it relies on an equitable right to self-governance, betting that people will freely and willingly volunteer to help one another improve their community. In reality, though, anarchies usually only arise temporarily out of the destruction of a previous government. While there are no true anarchist governments today, Somalia essentially operated as an anarchy before 2006, lacking any national government at all. The major glaring trade-off here is predictability. While the ideal is community volunteerism, the harsh reality is that an anarchist system often spirals straight into chaos the exact moment individuals prioritize pure self-interest over helping the community. So as we have seen throughout this explainer, there is absolutely no perfect blueprint. From the stability but rigidity of a constitutional government to the sheer efficiency but severe risk of abuse in an autocracy, every single system treats a unique benefit for a highly specific structural flaw. Which leaves us with a pretty compelling thought to ponder. Knowing these structural blueprints, which trade-off are you most willing to accept to safely organize our future?